The year was 1789. The air buzzed with the fragile hope of a new republic, yet beneath that hope lay uncertainty and fear. The American Revolution had ended, but the hard part was only beginning, governing a country that had never existed before. Into this tense silence walked George Washington, the war hero chosen as the first president of the United States. He knew the world was watching. Monarchs expected him to crown himself king. Skeptics waited for the experiment to fail. Even his own countrymen doubted if one man could unify 13 quarreling states. Washington understood one thing. If he failed, the entire American experiment could collapse before it even began. He took office in April 1789 in New York City, stepping into a role that had no blueprint. The Constitution was barely inked, and much of its meaning had yet to be tested. Every move Washington made would set a precedent. He decided to deliver an inaugural address, establishing a tradition that continues to this day. He also chose the modest title of Mr. President over grander names like Your Excellency, signaling that the office belonged to a public servant, not a monarch. These small choices helped define the tone of American democracy. Washington also built the first presidential cabinet. He appointed John Adams as vice president, though Adams was confused about his duties and called the position the most insignificant office ever devised. Henry Knox became Secretary of War, Thomas Jefferson Secretary of State, and Alexander Hamilton Secretary of the Treasury. They were brilliant minds but carried clashing ideologies that would soon shake the government. Another priority was establishing a judiciary. The Constitution mentioned courts but gave few details. Through the Judiciary Act of 1789, Washington and Congress created the federal court system with lower district courts and appointed John Jay as the first Chief Justice. This gave the judicial branch shape and authority, laying the foundation of the American legal system still used today. Yet while the government took form, citizens demanded guarantees of individual rights. Many states had ratified the Constitution on the condition that a Bill of Rights be added. Washington agreed and urged Congress to enshrine basic freedoms in law. James Madison led the drafting effort, and in 1791, the Bill of Rights, 10 amendments protecting freedoms like speech, religion, fair trials, and the right to bear arms, was ratified. It reassured the public that liberty would survive under the new federal power. As Washington strengthened the government's structure, the young nation was also expanding its borders. 3 new states joined during his presidency: Vermont in 1791, Kentucky in 1792, and Tennessee in 1796. But settling Western territories sparked fierce conflict with Native American nations. Determined to assert federal control, Washington sent General Josiah Harmar to crush Native resistance in the Northwest Territory. Instead, Harmar's army was slaughtered at the Battle of Kekionga in 1790. Hoping to redeem this humiliation, Washington ordered General Arthur St. Clair to launch another campaign. In 1791, St. Clair A.S. force of over 1,000 men was annihilated by a native confederacy led by the Miami chief Little Turtle at the Battle of the Wabash. Over 600 Americans died, the worst defeat the U.S. Army has ever suffered against native forces. The disaster triggered outrage. Congress launched its first-ever investigation of the executive branch, criticizing Secretary of War Henry Knox for poor planning but punishing no one. Instead, Washington used the crisis to strengthen the Army, raise military pay, and pass militia laws requiring all able-bodied men to serve if called. This marked a turning point. The federal government was asserting real power, for better or worse. While the frontier burned, Washington's administration saw triumph in another critical area: finance. His Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, devised a bold plan to rescue America's broken economy. He consolidated state debts into a national debt to build credit, issued government bonds, created tariffs, and established the U.S. Mint to standardize currency. Southern states resisted, fearing federal dominance, so Hamilton brokered the Compromise of 1790. The South would support his financial plan if the national capital moved south to the Potomac River. That deal birthed Washington, D.C. Hamilton's final masterpiece was the Bank of the United States, chartered in 1791. It managed debt, issued loans, and regulated currency. Critics like Jefferson called it unconstitutional and feared it would centralize too much power. Washington sided with Hamilton, believing it necessary and proper. The bank became the backbone of the new economy. Yet as Washington built stability, bitter political divisions grew. Hamilton and his allies formed the Federalist Party to champion strong, centralized power, commerce, and close ties with Britain. Jefferson and James Madison countered with the Democratic-Republican Party, defending states' rights and agrarian democracy. Washington leaned Federalist but hated partisanship, warning that it could poison the nation's spirit. Still, by the early 1790s, America had split into two hostile camps, an ominous shadow over the young republic. As George Washington entered his second term in 1793, the young republic was still fragile. While Washington had managed to establish key pillars of governance, the nation was embroiled in internal and external conflicts that tested the very foundations he had worked so hard to build. From economic policies to foreign alliances, Washington's leadership would be put to the ultimate test as the nation faced crises both at home and abroad. Whiskey Rebellion. Defying the government. One of Washington's most significant challenges during his second term came in the form of the Whiskey Rebellion. In 1791, Alexander Hamilton had imposed an excise tax on whiskey to raise revenue for the federal government. The tax hit farmers hardest, especially in the Western territories, where grain was often converted into whiskey for easier transport. To them, the tax felt like a direct attack on their livelihoods. In 1794, tensions boiled over when a group of farmers in western Pennsylvania violently resisted federal tax collectors. They were angered not only by the whiskey tax, but also by what they saw as an overbearing central government encroaching on their rights. When the local authorities were unable to quell the insurrection, Washington was forced to act. Recalling the failure of the Articles of Confederation to respond to Shays' rebellion just a decade earlier, Washington could not afford to let the new government appear weak. Using powers granted under the Militia Acts passed earlier, Washington called up a militia of over 13,000 men to suppress the rebellion. The show of force worked. When the militia arrived in western Pennsylvania, the rebels dispersed without much resistance, and the rebellion quickly collapsed. Washington's decision to personally lead the military to suppress the rebellion was a statement of authority. It demonstrated to both the people and the rest of the world that the federal government would no longer tolerate armed resistance to its laws. This moment served as a pivotal test for the new government, marking a clear break from the impotence of the previous system under the Articles of Confederation. The Battle of Fallen Timbers and Native American Resistance. While Washington faced rebellion at home, he was also confronted with continued resistance on the western frontier. As the U.S. expanded westward, tensions with Native American tribes in the Northwest Territory escalated. The British, still present in Canada, quietly supported Native American resistance to American encroachment, fearing that a stronger, more united United States would upset the balance of power in North America. Washington's government took a hard line against the Native American tribes in the Northwest. After two devastating defeats at the hands of the Native Confederacy in the Northwest Indian War, Washington finally turned the tide. In 1794, General Anthony Wayne led the U.S. Army to victory at the Battle of Fallen Timbers near present-day Ohio. The battle broke the Native American resistance, and the subsequent Treaty of Greenville in 1795 saw the tribes cede most of present-day Ohio to the United States. Washington's victory over the native forces marked the end of major resistance in the region and paved the way for further territorial expansion. Yet this victory came at a high cost, as the U.S. had to continue dealing with a fragile peace and the consequences of pushing native populations further west. Washington's handling of the conflict exemplified the delicate balancing act between expansion and diplomacy, a challenge that would continue to shape U.S. policy for generations. Foreign policy, a nation in the middle of European turmoil. While Washington dealt with domestic crises, he also faced significant challenges in the realm of foreign policy. The French Revolution had erupted in 1789, causing upheaval across Europe. Initially, many Americans, particularly Jefferson and his allies, were sympathetic to the French cause. After all, France had been a crucial ally during the American Revolution. Jefferson, ever the Francophile, believed that America should stand with France in their struggle against monarchical tyranny. However, Washington and his Federalist allies took a more cautious approach. They saw the French Revolution spiraling into chaos and feared that getting involved could drag America into a European war. When France declared war on Britain in 1793, the French government urged America to honor the 1778 Franco-American alliance and assist them against Britain. Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans demanded that America support France, but Washington, always calculating the national interest, issued a neutrality proclamation. This declaration stated that the U.S. would not involve itself in the conflict between France and Britain. This decision caused a significant split between Washington and Jefferson's factions. The French were furious, and Jefferson, who had long advocated for stronger ties with France, was deeply disappointed. He argued that the U.S. had a moral obligation to support France, as they had supported the U.S. during the Revolution. However, Washington held firm, believing that the new nation could not afford to risk war with Britain, a key trading partner. The fallout from Washington's neutrality policy was profound. It led to increasing political polarization within the United States, with the Federalists backing Washington's cautious diplomacy and the Democratic Republicans condemning it as a betrayal of revolutionary ideals. Relations with France, already strained, deteriorated further, and Washington's policy of neutrality became one of the most controversial aspects of his presidency. The Jay Treaty and Pinckney's Treaty. Despite the tension with France, Washington sought to stabilize relations with other European powers. In 1794, he sent Chief Justice John Jay to Britain to negotiate the Jay Treaty, which sought to resolve ongoing issues stemming from the Revolutionary War. The treaty required Britain to evacuate its forts in the Northwest Territory and establish more favorable trade relations between the two nations. While the treaty was far from perfect and faced considerable opposition from Jeffersonian Republicans, it was deemed necessary to prevent another war with Britain. The Jay Treaty was followed by Pinckney's Treaty in 1795, which Washington negotiated with Spain. This treaty settled territorial disputes between the U.S. and Spain and granted American ships the right to navigate the Mississippi River, a vital trade route. Pinckney's Treaty was a diplomatic victory, securing U.S. access to important waterways and improving relations with Spain. By the end of Washington's second term, the United States had secured important diplomatic victories. The country was not yet a fully established global power, but Washington had laid the groundwork for future foreign policy successes. He had navigated a volatile period of European wars, avoiding direct involvement while ensuring the survival of the fledgling republic. Political factions and Washington's farewell address. Despite his successes, Washington grew increasingly frustrated with the growing division between political factions in his second term. The rise of political parties was one of the most unexpected developments of his presidency. Alexander Hamilton's Federalist Party and Thomas Jefferson's Democratic-Republican Party increasingly clashed over issues like the national bank, foreign policy, and the role of the federal government. Washington, who had hoped to avoid party politics, watched with concern as the country became more polarized. In his farewell address of 1796, Washington urged Americans to avoid entangling alliances and warned against the dangers of political factions. He saw them as a threat to national unity, believing that partisan infighting would ultimately tear the nation apart. Washington's decision to retire after 2 terms was both a personal choice and a powerful symbol. He could have easily stayed in power for life, but he chose to step down, setting a precedent for peaceful transitions of power that continues to this day. His voluntary departure helped cement the principle of limited presidential terms, ensuring that no leader could hold power indefinitely. The legacy of George Washington. By the time Washington left office in 1797, the nation had endured tumultuous challenges, yet it had emerged stronger and more unified. His leadership, though not without controversy, helped shape the future of the United States. Washington left behind a nation with a stable government, a growing economy, and a foreign policy that kept the young republic out of European conflicts. Yet, Washington's work was far from over. The deep political divisions he had witnessed during his presidency would only deepen in the years that followed as his successors faced the issues he had worked to resolve. Washington had laid the foundations of the American system, but it was up to future leaders to build upon them. As Washington bade farewell to the presidency, his legacy was clear. He had given America the best chance for success, and his example would guide future generations in preserving the republic he had fought so hard to establish.